Are we live already? Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Haug and I am the chair of the South Area Committee. I would like to welcome you to the South Area Committee taking place on Monday, 13th of June 2022 at 7 p.m. That's today's date. Please can I welcome returning and current members of the South Area Committee. I would also like to welcome public speakers and those watching on the Council's YouTube channel. And before I begin with councillors present at the meeting, I have received apologies from Councillor Dryden, Councillor Macpherson and Councillor Beckett. If you know of any more as I go along the list, then please say so. Present should be Councillor Ashton. I don't know if he's rejoined us. Okay, maybe he'll join later. I don't remember exactly what he said earlier. Is he going to join later?
Yeah, I think he was going to try and phone in or join in.
Councillor Cox.
Alan's here.
Okay,
yeah.
present. Yeah. Councillor Davies.
Yes,
present. Here. Councillor Flaubert. Okay, not present. Councillor Lee.
Present.
Okay, fantastic. And Councillor Page-Croft.
I'm here, Chair.
Okay, these are the city councillors, and then there should be County Councillor Goodlife.
Present.
Hello, and Councillor Slatter.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the officers permanently at the table for this meeting are the committee manager, James Goddard.
Good
the
evening.
meeting producer, Boris Herzig. And
Yes,
if
Chair.
anyone has any problems hearing me throughout the meeting, then please alert me by typing in the meeting chat function. Some housekeeping first. Councillors may recall at the recent annual meeting that it was agreed to continue to run area committees virtually. That means we are not decision making we can't make decisions at the moment, but we can discuss local issues. The meeting is being broadcast live via the council's website. So all speakers are reminded that by speaking at this meeting, you are giving consent to being recorded. And this meeting is automatically recorded and will be available via the council's YouTube pages. And the process for each agenda item will be the relevant officer will give a brief introduction. Councillors and members of the public are then invited to speak in the chat function if they want to make a question or a statement. And the committee manager will check the Democratic Services mailbox to see whether any public questions have been submitted and read these out if received. For the comfort of councillors, officers and the public, I may choose to call short breaks during the proceedings, although I don't think that will be necessary tonight. If councillors or officers require a break at any point, then please indicate that to me and I will hold proceedings accordingly. If there are no questions or comments right now, then we can move on to agenda item 2. So please could councillors advise if they have any declarations of interest and also identify which item the declaration relates to. Are there any tonight? I don't think that's the case. So we can move on to agenda item 3. The notes of the meeting of the 7th of March 2022 can be found in the agenda. Are there any concerns or comments or changes, suggestions? That doesn't seem to be the case, so I guess we can approve the minutes. Oh, actually, yeah.
May I interrupt, Chair? Not so much or approve, but not sign off because it's not decision making.
Yeah.
A subtle difference, Chair.
I think I made this mistake at every meeting so far, so I'll make it again. Thank you for correcting me there. Okay, so item 4, matters and actions arising from the minutes. There is no action sheet attached to this agenda, so we can move straight into item number 5, and that's the open forum. So please, could I invite Imogen Blackburn-Horgan to put forward her question, please, if she's present. Imogen, are you here? If not, then committee chair, would you please read the question?
Certainly, Chair. I have a statement from Imogen. I think there were 2 questions. which unfortunately I've just turned over my hard copies, which is
I've got
very.
it here as well. I mean, I've got a question. First of all, just to say a massive thank you for our Platinum Jubilee Grant, which enabled a fantastic event at Bell International Language School with 2 of our local councillors in attendance making presentations, which was much appreciated, Councillor Sam Davies and Councillor Daniel Lee. So that's nice feedback. And the question then is, Imogen, Secretary, Red Cross areas and scheme coordinator. I'm sorry if I glanced over this a bit. So is this, okay, I'm sorry if I'm confusing myself now. Edinburgh's, the NHS and the CBC campus has a massive presence in our area and is the largest employer that aims to get even bigger. Its impact on the local areas that adjoin the site proves to be significant. Building on success, such as the regular...
Councillor Mark Ashton
is now joining.
Okay, hello, Councillor Ashton. So building on...
Hello, yes, I can hear.
So we are at item number 5. I'm about to read the first question in the open forum.
Okay.
So building on success, such as the regular police and NHS security meetings, would now be time, or the time, to give consideration to Edinburgh's joining and being a contributor to the South Area Committee. So before I move on, is there an answer to this question?
Councillor Mark Ashton
is now exiting.
Could you actually please repeat the question, because we got all confused, I think.
Okay, I think you're not the only one.
Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome, Councillor Flowbird. So I note you are present. Okay, so do we all want the question again? So Edinburgh's, I think the gist of the question is Edinburgh's NHS and the CBC campus have grown a lot in the recent past and are probably going to grow even more in the future. So is this the time to represent Edinburgh's at the South Area Committee? I think that's more or less the summary of this question. I wonder, is this a question to all of us, or is there somebody in particular who this is addressed to?
I think I can display the question on screen if you wish, Chair.
Yes, I mean, that would be useful. I think, but again, I think the question is, should Edinburgh's be, or various stakeholders in Edinburgh's be represented at the South Area Committee, because it has now grown quite a lot, or is going to grow in the future. And
Chair,
I
mean, can I
sorry.
offer some thoughts on this?
Yes, sorry, I didn't pay attention. Yes, there are hands up there. Yes, please, Councillor Davies.
So I think the suggestion is that because of the huge influence that the campus exerts over all of our wards, perhaps there should be some regular attendance by someone, the way the police attend, the way environmental services attend, such that there's an opportunity to democratically interrogate them about their activities as they come into conflict with or enhance the lives of our residents. I think that's quite an interesting idea, and I would certainly be in favour of at least piloting a session and seeing how that went.
Mm.
Okay, thank you.
Agree.
Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I would certainly be interested in thinking about this and considering ways. I mean, it would be a complete break with what we've done before, but well worth considering, I think. I mean, as you say, we have occasions to talk to the police and ask them questions, and I think it would bring it into a more general forum. I mean, some of our residents' associations, I know, do ask for people to come and answer questions about particular topics. As you say, CBC Limited, if they are now choosing to present themselves with that one sort of front person or name, if that's what you're meaning, Councillor Davis, I know that they are trying to do communication, community engagement through other residents' associations. I think it is well worth considering, Chairman, in a measured way, not every time, but an opportunity for question and answer, which would reach a slightly different set of people than, say, residents' associations or local planning application displays, the sort of thing we might otherwise have. Thank you.
In response to that, I guess we would need to find a contact, or contacts somewhere, and we could simply inform these contacts of our meeting. So if they want to attend, they can, and if we have a particular reason to invite them to the meeting, then we can also make this clear. So do we have contacts like this already?
Say probably Sam already knows. Yes, we have. They are already presenting material to the Community Forum in Queen Edith, the TRA in Trumpington, and Shelford. I forget what the name is there, Councillor Davis, but so they, and I think there, I don't know whether it's Dr. Rutter or who, but they can. We have ways of asking them to go through with that, I'm sure.
Okay.
Certainly, I have meetings every now and then, and I'm sure that Councillor Davis does as well.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Davis, is that in your hand?
Yes, it is, Chair. And this would not be entirely unprecedented. I mean, we have used our ability to call in, for example, Stagecoach in the past to answer questions. And I think the delineation Councillor Slatter offered that this isn't specifically a planning related request. This is about all facets of how the campus interacts with our residents' lives. And I fully accept that they are now using this outreach to Trumpington Residents Association and the Community Forum and to Shelford Parish Council. But I think it's very important that to recognise that doesn't remove the need for engagement with the democratically elected local members, and asking CBC to attend South Area Committee, CBC Limited to attend South Area Committee twice a year, or whatever we thought was the appropriate interval, would seem to me like a helpful piece of scrutiny and accountability.
Agree.
Okay. I think if there are no objections, then I think we should aim for that, and maybe we can take this offline and decide. I mean, if you have contacts already in your available, then we will arrange that and see how we can do this in practice. Is that okay for now? I know that we can't make decisions here, but we can make a plan. So fantastic. Thank you very much. I mean, in that case, unless there are more comments on this particular issue, there is a second question also from Imogen. Sorry, was there some?
Yes, sorry, I can't raise my hand because I can't find this little icon.
Okay.
Maybe could you add that for a follow-up? So in the next meeting, we know that what plan are we likely to have?
Sure. I mean, ideally, maybe even beforehand by email, at least as a note. So we will, of course, keep the committee informed. Yes, thank you. So the second question from Imogen is, unfortunately, Councillor Beckett is not here, but I'll read the question anyway. Can Councillor Alex Beckett, as Chair of Highways Committee, raise neighbourhood street designation, may assist Red Cross areas, C, designing out the dangers, issues and solutions doc produced by Red Cross Areas Residents Association? I'm afraid, I don't know, the sentence sounds a bit scrambled to me. But I read it verbatim as it was written. Has there been an answer to this already in written form?
Don't know.
Okay, in that case, we can only forward it.
Mark Ashton
is now joining.
Don't know, Chair.
Okay,
Is this something that will come in the next item anyway, Chair?
I don't know, because I only know the question. I mean, I just read the question as it was submitted. And unfortunately, the person who submitted the question is not present. So Unless there are any immediate thoughts, I mean, I suggest we forward this question to Councillor Beckett, and we can then put that in the minutes or yeah, for the next meeting. Okay, then there is question number 2 from Anna Conway Morris. Is she present? I don't think I've seen her name, so I'll read the question then. I am a volunteer at Trumpington Football Club. I would like to know what conditions were put on the planning permission for the St. Mary's School or Homerton College Sports Complex on Long Road with regard to community use. And I think we did get an answer to that question, which unfortunately I don't have in front of me. Committee manager, do you happen to have the answer?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. I knew I could rely on you.
The answer was supplied by Katie Christodoulis, who is the principal planner. Dear Anna, who is the questioner, many thanks for your email. In response to your query on the decision notice, condition 25 states the sports pitches and pavilion use hereby permitted shall only be used between the hours 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Saturday and 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sunday. Reason, in the interest of residential amenity, this is from the Cambridge Local Plan 2018 policies 55 and 57. There's also a summary of condition 26, which is about half a page long, Chair, but
Okay.
the details were emailed to the questioner.
Yes, and they are available on request to other interested parties, I guess. Thank you very much. I think you mentioned earlier there were further questions available which are not on the agenda yet.
I received a question from Dr. O'Brien, who I'm not sure is in the meeting, Chair.
Okay, but would you mind reading the question? Yeah?
I can.
Great, thank you.
There's a series of them. I think Dr. O'Brien asked some questions the 29th of November, so his questions follow up. He has been in contact with a number of officers, and I think a David Mallia. Oh, sorry, he's one of Chris. So I'm not quite sure if we're able to answer tonight. It might be for ward councillors to follow up. But Dr. O'Brien has noted the responses he was sent earlier and has come up with some follow-up questions. The first regards the adoption plan for abode. He has requested an up-to-date adoption plan. Can he have it? Referring to dead trees and shrubberies across abode, these trees are not well established and have died, and as such can Countryside provide funds to replace these? He's asking for clarification on what efforts are being made to hold Countryside to this responsibility. He has been informed by Countryside that resurfacing works may be required on the roads within abode to finalise adoption, but he's awaiting specific details. I can send the more detailed questions to all councillors if you wish to follow up, Chair.
I think that's the most sensible way of doing it, unless anyone here would like to respond to that. Yeah, Councillor Slatter.
Yes, I think that all of the local councillors are aware of the correspondence, which has been extensive and lengthy, and understandably so, because this is to do with the handover of new builds and the complexities that result from the fragmentation of ownership, even once they are handed over. It used to be a matter of it either belonged to the person who lived in the house or the city council or the county council, but now we have many, many other people who can end up responsible for looking after shrubs and trees and side roads. And it isn't good, and I'm not sure that we can improve it. But he's quite right to be raising it, because I would certainly hope that future new builds in other areas, I think we probably run out of land in Trumpington, but certainly in other wards, need to be on the lookout for the detail of the S106 arrangements they can get back and bite us later, as we are finding in Abode, which is part of Trumpington. So it's a bit gloomy, but I do sympathise with Dr. O'Brien on this one, very much so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether it will be any consolation to Dr. O'Brien to hear that the Nine Wells development is just as beset with this problem, particularly in relation to tree maintenance, as it sounds like Abode is experiencing. I do firmly believe that developers are not, in all cases, upholding their responsibility to the residents who have moved into their sites. And I would encourage this committee to warmly endorse any action that officers can take to stop developers shortchanging residents and ultimately shortchanging the city council with whom they have a contractual arrangement to deliver these amenities in the shape of trees and green spaces. I think that would be a very helpful message to send back, given the frequency with which this problem seems to be being encountered at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes, we may be discussing this in some future meetings as well, but I mean, obviously we have to keep it on the agenda. I mean, are there any more comments or even answers on this issue? Otherwise, I would suggest we move on. Are there any more questions from the mailbox, email box? Or...
Can I make a comment, please, Chair?
Of course.
Is it possible we could get a response from our open spaces people about what actions they are taking in these matters? So particularly Joel Carr, head of the service, and the Executive Councillor Alex Collis, and point out our concerns about what we see happening in South Area and what actions we are taking now to try and prevent this in the future.
May I ask who's talking? I'm sorry,
It's Councillor Ashton.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sure they are aware of these issues.
Can we bring it
I
up?
definitely think it's a good idea to make sure that we keep reminding them and we ask for a response. Councillor Slater, is your hand still up?
I think it may well be true of the Queen Edith experience as well, but very often, Councillor Ashton, these aren't coming into the hands of open spaces. That's the problem. Sometimes they're very slow getting into the hands of open spaces. If I was to turn the camera around and look out the window, I've got an example outside my door. But we know that eventually it will be in the hands of open spaces. Then we know where we are. But there are these in-between limbo lands multiplying all over the city that don't come into any of the council responsibilities, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, we went on a tour of Trumpington, the new developments, with an officers team, and we discussed these issues. And unfortunately, the developers usually have subcontractors who they don't necessarily have much control over. And once I think it is in the city council hands, I think they know what they are doing. But this has to happen. Unfortunately, as Councillor Slater says, we are a bit in a limbo there. But yes, Councillor Davies.
Just to say, I do think this is a planning issue. It's a planning enforcement issue. Planning permission is granted with conditions, including the provision of these trees. And I know on Nine Wells that there are some trees which have now died and been replaced and died again, and we're on our third iteration. And it's, as I say, it's shortchanging the occupants on that site. From a climate point of view, it's very bad practice. And I think it also looks quite spineless to residents. Someone needs to be getting a grip on this, and we need to be defining the process by which that happens. And I completely understand that that's beyond the remit of South Area Committee, But I think if South Area Committee, given its direct experience of this, just throws its hands up and goes, oh, well, that's not very good, we're letting people down. We should be providing this as formal feedback into the planning process that this needs to be nailed down.
Okay. I'm happy to do that on behalf of the committee, and maybe we can get together and see how we do this in the most efficient way. Is that a good plan?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Slatter.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not quite sure on the action. You will liaise with whom about what, please?
With Councillor Davies to then context, or with of course people who are interested or willing, in order to draft such a, or to then contact the Open Spaces team or whoever is relevant in this context to highlight the importance of this issue as feedback from the residents of the South Area via the South Area Committee. Is Councillor Setter, your hand still up?
It is up because I quite agree with Councillor Davis that we do appear to be spineless. But I think when it comes to the planning conditions, the conditions are that this is what they should do. And the question is, who are they then handing it over to? Very often we have housing associations who take receipt of land and facilities, perhaps without being that particularly choosy. We have all sorts of examples of faulty facilities and even buildings that are accepted by housing associations. There are then these management companies who do appear to be a very different sort of animal. Now, if we're saying that we're not going to have any planning applications agreed with these sort of arrangements in future, or what is starting to be called fleasehold, that's a big issue, and I think it's probably a matter for MPs as much as for councillors. And I do agree with you, Councillor Davis. It is a big problem, but I think we need to be realistic about what we can do. Certainly, in retrospect, in the case of the applications that have already been accepted, but the new ones coming over the hill, maybe we can have a look at them in a different way.
I mean, I guess as councillors, we are not spineless, but often teethless. So it's just the different body part that's missing. So, but I think I agree that at least we should be the voice of our residents. We should definitely make sure this topic does appear on the agenda. And at least I think we sort of owe that to our residents there. And I think this is what this forum or this committee is for. So if we maybe get together offline and take this further and again feed this back to the South Area Committee, I think then that's a little step forward.
Chair, could I ask a quick question again?
Yes.
It's Councillor Ashton, for those who wonder who's speaking. In the past, South Area have requested either planners or open space people to come to our forums so they can be questioned by the public direct, not in their ivory towers. And also we have a chance as councillors to put our points as well, so they really understand why we are concerned. So I wonder whether or not we should make a request for our next South Area Committee that somebody from planning.
Okay, I guess you were short, but I mean, I think I got the idea. So ask somebody. I wasn't quite sure from planning or open spaces or both.
Planning.
Planning. Okay.
I think he had mentioned open spaces before, and that is often the very crucial people who are going to be looking after it in future.
Chair, can I just come in there? Does
Yes.
Councillor Ashton mean somebody from the planning committee or one of the planning officers who actually
Planning
then...
officer.
Planning officer. Yeah, because then they can carry on about the conditions and why we're not chasing up the conditions for these trees and bushes, because this is where we're falling down.
I think the idea would be, I think it was Councillor Slatter who said that. I mean, the least we can do, I think, is learn from the mistakes that were made and analyze why these things are happening now, and then how can we avoid them in the future.
Chair, if I can make a suggestion, it might be very instructive to have someone from planning enforcement to attend the meeting. The tree issue could be part of that, but actually I'm sure with enough notice, residents would have a multitude of other issues that they would like planning enforcement to explain to them. So that might make more of a rounded agenda item.
Yep.
Okay, it's noted. I will arrange something in collaboration with other attendees here, with other members of the committee, hopefully for the next South Area Committee meeting. Okay, are there any more comments on this particular issue? I mean, if not, then are there any further questions? I think that's it. I mean, could the committee manager please check if there are any more questions in the mailbox?
I'm just checking the mailbox now, Chair.
I had warned you, Mr. Chairman, that I was going to ask for permission to speak on behalf of some residents.
Of course. Okay, in that case, please go ahead.
Okay, I can go ahead now. Hard on the heels of the last element, we have in Trumpington several new bridges, footbridges over the Hobson's Brook, and areas of water, the ponds. At the moment, they're bridges 1, 2, 3, and 4, and ponds 1, 2, and 3, which isn't very exciting. And I would like to propose that we set in train a public consultation for choosing names for these. The reason for bringing this is that they've just got the new footbridge at the end of our road opened, and local residents were saying, can we call it the Jubilee Bridge? Can we call it the Platinum Bridge? And that reminded me that when we were naming roads and rooms in the new community centre, these were done by the public, voting on a short list that had been put forward. And it was really a very positive exercise. And I would like to ask the officers to consider doing this for the new bridges and ponds, because it is important that we can have names and people can meet one another on the bridge or whatever relevant use of the name. So if that seems a reasonable thing to other councillors, I'd like to ask for that. I know it would be a bit of officer time, but we can help as local councillors.
What about?
I don't think it quite goes into anybody else's ward, that, but if they're interested, I'm sure they can chip in. Thank you.
What about a Bridge 9 for Trumpington? That doesn't quite sound like Portneuf, not quite as romantic, but
we'd have to put a few more in, I'm afraid. We've only got the 4. You'll have to build your own, councillor.
Yeah. But I'm not exactly sure what we can do about this suggestion. I guess we can just forward it to officers and see if they agree, and then if there's a process for that.
Well, we have done it before. I think it lies in planning, in the final, tweaks of the finished programmes. But it's much better if we choose the names than the developers do, because we've managed to head off several developers' suggestions in the past. And I think the residents should do their own thing again.
So what is the status of these bridges, and are they adopted? I mean, are they still with the developers, or are they now with the council?
Only one is fully functional. We've got 2 that are there but not joined up, but they will come into the hands of the city council. So it is something that will take some resources from the city council to do, but I think would be very welcome if people think it's a reasonable thing to carry on with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can put this in the minutes. And I mean, I'm assuming, Councillor Slater, you are going to contact the corresponding officers about this suggestion? Or
if there's no objections from fellow councillors, yes, I'm very aware I'm a county councillor here, and I'm, talking about naming your things, sir.
In that case, all Trumpington councillors will get together and choose a cross-party approach to this issue. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Slater. And I think that concludes the open forum. Oh, sorry.
I'll just check the DEM services, Chair, if that's all right.
Yeah.
There appears to be a public question, Chair, from Amanda Nielsen. I'm not sure if she's on the call. If not, I can read the question.
Yeah, yes, please. I think that's probably easiest.
This regards trees and green spaces on new developments. The questioner is not entirely sure that through audits, that although audits are undertaken, when transferring to the City Council, Glebe Farm has had parks and green spaces taken over. Tree guards remained on a majority of planting. Residents removed those where they could. Trees already dead or dying now replaced at council expense. I'm not sure if that's a statement or a question, but I will put it in the chat. So councillors.
It sounds related. I mean, almost identical to the issue we discussed earlier.
It may be someone's watching the live stream has sent in a comment. Chair.
I guess the question is what kind of audits are undertaken. Or the tree guards. Okay, it's about tree guards apparently. Dead or dying, or yeah, I think it's very much. I think it's the same question. It's a very similar question to the one we discussed earlier. Unless anyone has any immediate ideas, then I think we can maybe move on. Okay, in that case, I think we can move on. So thank you very much for all who participated in this discussion. I think that was very useful. So now we move on to agenda item 6, where we have the Greater Cambridge Partnership will inform us about the consultation regarding a new road classification for Cambridge. It's on page 7 of the agenda. We are also joined from the GCP by Richard Preston, Project Manager. Hello. Sarah Prentice, Communications Manager, and Emily Glover, Communications and Engagement Officer. Thank you very much for making time tonight. John, please, could I ask you to deliver the first presentation or the presentation?
Sorry, Chair, were you referring to me?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading my script. So if whoever wants to give the presentation could please get ready. In my script, it's John, but I'm happy to change that.
And good evening to councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to come to the area committee to explore in more detail the road classification review. If I may, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and going through a presentation, and then afterwards I'm more than happy to respond to any issues or questions that councillors or members of the public might want to raise. So if you can bear with me while I share my screen. Right, hopefully you can see the presentation.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, a new road classification for Cambridge. I'm going to start off by asking the question, why are we reviewing the current classification? Well, a bit of a history lesson here. The network in Cambridge was last reviewed back in the 1980s following the opening of the northern and western bypasses, that's the A14 and the M11. And a lot has happened since then. Significant change in transport policy, particularly recently, and also there have been significant physical changes to the road network. So it was felt an appropriate time to review the classification to reflect these changing priorities and to take into account some very significant policies and strategies that need to be given due weight within any classification of the road network. And you see before you some of those significant policies and strategies that we need to take account of. The key aims of the review, they focus very much on quality of life issues. Very importantly, we need to respond to the climate change challenges, and we're very focused on improving health and well-being by encouraging more physical activity on the network through providing a better environment. I think we're all familiar with the concerns over air quality in the city that's a result of our congestion, and we're very focused on tackling that through encouraging more active travel and promoting greater use of public transport. Perhaps one aspect of the highway network that hasn't been given sufficient consideration in the past has been the sense of place. Most of our focus has been on the highway network as a movement network, but it also forms an important part of the public realm, and we recognise that we need to enhance that sense of place within the public highway to promote more social and community interaction, to allow people to enjoy that highway network environment far more than they do at the present time. And by that, we want to improve access through to work, education, leisure, and focusing on our green spaces in the city. So if we start with the current road network, which is pretty familiar to you all, I'm sure, and the map shows here that the main road network in the city and shows the key classifications of those main roads. In the 1980s, when the renumbering exercise was last undertaken, the ring road system was first defined and numbered as the A1134. It's interesting to note at that time, whilst a ring road was designated in the city to act as a main circulatory element of the road network, the decision was taken to retain main roads through the very heart of the city. And you can see there that Hills Road is currently classed as an A-class road, and the East Road, Gonville Place, Lensfield Road, Crosslink is currently classified as an A road, the A603. And in many ways that has tended to undermine the use of the ring road and has led to a lot of traffic continuing to pass through the very heart of the city. So in terms of our ambition for the review, it's the intention to focus car, van and lorry traffic on our main roads as much as possible, thereby reducing the amount of traffic we have on some of our more local roads and streets. Many of those local roads and streets are currently used by disproportionately heavy volumes of traffic. Many of these routes prove very popular as rat runs, where drivers can avoid longer delays on the main road network. The intention would be that we would tackle that through traffic problem on many of the local roads and streets by introducing point road closures, which are commonly now known as modal filters. And they would prevent through movements, but would retain access to properties by motor vehicles coming from the appropriate nearest junction on the main road network. In terms of the outcomes, clearly, if we go down this route, we will see more private car vehicle journeys directed on the main road network. Those trips may be less direct as a result and potentially longer. And I think we also need to recognise, particularly given the cost of fuel at the present times, those longer journeys may be more expensive. In future, many of our local streets could carry less traffic as a result, and obviously noise, congestion and pollution will all be improved as a result of that. But clearly there would be a risk that traffic could transfer from many of our local streets to our main roads. And we would need to understand exactly the scale of any changes that would take place as a result of implementing a new classification. And therefore we would have to undertake extensive traffic modelling to make sure we're fully aware of what those implications are. Where we would introduce these modal filters to prevent through movements, we would make access available for cycles and for scheduled bus services, because clearly we want to promote that form of transport and make it as reliable, pleasant and convenient as possible. So as a starting point, we've defined a series of street categories and we've taken the initial opportunity to apply some of those categories to the current roadmap in the city. I'm going to jump ahead just to go through these categories of streets. We start off with two levels of distributor roads. These would be the main movement system in the city. The primary distributor roads would act as the main feeder into and around the city, and they would be supported by secondary distributor roads that would fill in some of the gaps that appear between some of the major routes. That's particularly true on the east side of the city, where we've never had a major arterial route coming into and out of the city. Under that first level of distributor roads, we would then move to 2 levels of access streets. The first would be called area access streets, and they would, as the name suggests, they would provide links into major areas of the city to provide access to all the destinations within. Those area access streets would then be underpinned by local access streets, which would provide access to smaller areas of the city. A fifth category of street we've named as civic streets, and these would be mainly the smaller streets in the city centre, where we have a lot of pedestrian, retail, education, business activity, where we would be looking to restrict access by all motor vehicles throughout a period of the day to give greater priority to walking and cycling in particular.
Councillor Mark Ashton
is now exiting.
We have a sixth category of street, which is called a neighbourhood street, and they would be all the roads that would remain within the network. I would stress that these are terms we have developed. They're not set in stone. We're very keen to receive feedback on how we should term these streets. But as a starting point, we've taken these categories of streets and we've applied them to the road network, and you can see the plan that we've come up with. You can see the primary and secondary distributor roads shown in the red and blue colours. And then you move down to the area access streets, which are in the pale purple colour. And they're, as I say, underpinned by local access streets, which is shown in green. And then we have a cluster of streets in the heart of the city, which are our civic streets, where we would see that greater priority given to pedestrians and cycling in particular. This is the first stab at defining a new network. It's certainly not set in stone. We're very keen to give the public the opportunity to influence and inform the shape of this map before we put it forward for any decision on formal adoption. Of course, from this, there are a series of key issues that arise that we're very keen to get public feedback on. I've mentioned the issue of traffic displacement and the risk that we might be moving greater amounts of traffic from our local streets onto our main roads, and we need to make sure we understand and can mitigate that as much as possible. In the city centre, we have a particular problem in terms of bus routing. At the present time, the major bus interchange for the city centre is concentrated in a small area around Drummer Street bus station. Prior to the pandemic, that area was already working at overcapacity, and taking into account the proposals for an enhanced bus service in the Greater Cambridge area that the GCP is promoting with the County Council and the Combined Authority, which could lead to a doubling of the number of buses on our network. There are questions to be asked about where we could manage that interchange going forward. And we certainly feel that just trying to ram more buses into the central area is not a sustainable way forward. So we're floating the idea that bus routing should be made, should be taken further out from that very concentrated area in the city.
Is now joining.
And as a result, we would then have to provide alternative interchange facilities a little bit further out. That would, in many ways, help to deliver that wider pedestrian and cycling priority in many of the streets in the city centre. As part of this, we also need to look at how we manage access by taxis. At the current time, taxis are exempt from many access restrictions on the road network. They're allowed into many of the access restricted streets in the city centre at the present time, and they also enjoy the privilege of using bus lanes and bus gates. We're asking questions about should that remain the case going forward, or should we start to adopt a slightly different approach in terms of where we allow taxis to access. We're also keen to hear people's views on whether we should continue to treat hackney carriages the taxis that occupy our ranks in the city, in the same way that we would treat private hire cars, the cars that have to be pre-booked for their journeys, and whether it's right time to differentiate between those groups or whether we should continue to treat them in the same way. If we have an extended area of pedestrian and cycling priority in the city centre, there would be questions about how we maintain deliveries to many of the businesses and retailers in the heart of the city. And we've done some early work focusing on how we might help to achieve greater consolidation of a lot of those deliveries to reduce the number of vehicles that actually need to make trips into the central area to facilitate the needs of business and retailers in particular. So we're very keen to get some feedback on that. And we've been asking the questions of, should we have more flexibility where deliveries are made in a consolidated way and where they might be using low emission vehicles, which would then reduce the impact those vehicles have on the highway environment. We also need to take into account road safety policies at the County Council to make sure that the review is contributing towards greater safety on our road network. Whenever you're talking about restricting access on the road network, inevitably there will be requests that come forward for exemptions based on vehicles or particular users. And we're asking a series of questions about those exemptions within the public consultation that we've currently got out in the public arena. So we're very keen to hear people's views on how we respond to some of those issues. As part of the consultation, what are we asking for feedback on? Well, we're very keen to hear people's views on those initial street categories and on how we've applied them to the network map. We'd also be very keen to hear feedback on this table that's part of the consultation material that sets out the level of accessibility we would provide based on individual modes. With walking and cycling, the aim is to provide as much accessibility on the road network as we possibly can, because clearly we're very keen on promoting active travel. We also want to make sure that buses have the right level of access across the network to make sure that we can encourage greater use of public transport. In terms of cars, commercial vehicles, light goods, heavy goods, clearly under this agenda, they would have less accessibility across the network. And some of their journeys would be longer and potentially in some cases more inconvenient. We're very keen to hear views on how we would tackle some of the deliveries that are made by vehicles that are consolidating and making multiple trips as opposed to those one-off trips that certain vehicles have to make into the city. With emergency service vehicles, clearly, again, we want to give as much access across the whole network as we can to facilitate prompt responses from our emergency services. The last category set out in the table looks at the vehicles that are used by blue badge holders, which is always an emotive issue, but it's also quite a difficult issue to address, given that blue badges are issued to people rather than to vehicles. And sometimes it makes it more challenging if we're looking at how we might facilitate that access, because it is more difficult to enforce any arrangements. So clearly we're looking for public consultation to help shape our approach to the way that we treat the use of blue badges in terms of access restrictions. The consultation started on the 23rd of May. It runs through to the 18th of July, as well as attending various area committee meetings and forums. We've also set up some public meetings to allow us to respond to issues from the public. And clearly, this is part of that very broad consultation that we're undertaking across not only the city, but the whole of the Cambridge travel area. So we are trying to engage with as many stakeholders from as many different communities as we possibly can. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. Very informative and interesting. Obviously, lots of opinions, I guess, on this issue. Councillor Slatter had her hand up first.
I beat you to it, everybody.
Yes, thanks, seriously. Thank you very much. I've been meaning to take part in this consultation, and you've made it much easier for me, Richard, by giving me a lead in. And I'm glad to see that some of the things that were coming into my mind as you would give in the presentation are indeed covered in those later slides. I did want to talk about buses insofar as how we define those. And you mentioned scheduled buses in the beginning of your discussion, and then you did mention school transport. One thing we're very keen to try and do in the context of, for example, the big employers like Addenbrooke's, or not so much Addenbrooke's as CBC, is to actually get travelling to work by omnibus of some sort or another, to make it attractive for people to choose to get in a bus that is being shared with a lot of people. So I want to make sure we have got those people and those vehicles able to get through whatever transponder, bus gate, or whatever we are going to be introducing. So that's the main thing, because I think that people are being encouraged to get together to have minibuses that fit their needs, and obviously the travelling to work and travelling back from work has to respond to shifts and destinations particularly, then that we need to take account of that. And the other one right at the end you had about blue badges. I think maybe we need to look again at whether blue badges should always only be for people, because we now have problems with the minibuses for groups such as Dial-A-Ride, and some of the homes where you would expect them to be able to get a blue badge for the vehicle, and that would be able to travel to some of the places where they need short distances to their final destination. So those are two things I would want to raise, and I don't think that looks as if it would work in the consultation, so I'm being a bit idle and trying to get in there just because we're in this meeting. Thank you.
Chair, do you want me to respond now, or?
I think that would make most sense. Yes, please.
Yeah, certainly in terms of buses, yes, the suggestion is we need to be broad in our interpretation of what a bus means. Clearly, if we start excluding minibuses, which are, I think, have the ability to remove quite a few car trips off the network, it would be pretty stupid if we start excluding them. But clearly, we need to make sure we have the right method of control, and we need to make sure that those minibuses are being put to appropriate uses. So I think that, I think we do recognise the need for flexibility there, but also to make sure that it's not just a free-for-all, that the vehicles are being put to a legitimate use. Blue badges, I think we're welcoming all views on blue badge, how we respond to the needs of blue badge holders, because it's always a difficult one to form decisions on. Clearly, the expectation is going forward that we're going to see more and more blue badges being issued, and there will be more and more potential trips by motorised traffic as a result of that. And if you're looking at the numbers, I think we need to make sure that we set the policy at the appropriate level. I think one of the things perhaps I didn't mention in the presentation was, in some areas, the approach has been to perhaps take sort of have a two-tier system where you perhaps have a different arrangement with people who have very severe mobility problems, as compared to perhaps some people who are blue badge holders but perhaps have that slightly higher level of mobility than others, and whether it's appropriate to differentiate or whether we just take a consistent approach for all blue badge holders. I think that's an area going forward that will be heavily influenced by the feedback we get at public consultation.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Davies, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Preston, I've got 4 points I want to raise with you. So the first is about resilience. Every time we have either planned roadworks in the south of the city or emergencies, the road network grinds to a halt because we're already running at capacity. And I'd like to understand how you envisage this system working such that if there's an accident on one of the primary routes, the city doesn't entirely grind to a standstill. So I'm thinking about, you know, for example, the tragic accident that happened at Addenbrooke's roundabout. Even with the majority of routes in the city being open at this point, traffic was still stuck basically for about 3 or 4 hours. And I absolutely understand the aspiration to make the changes that you want to the fabric of the city, but I am acutely conscious of the lack of resilience in the network if one element goes down. And in particular on that, I'd note that the proposed classification that you showed shows one east-west route in the whole of the south of the city, which is Long Road. So I have some questions about how that would work, and I wonder what sort of approach you're taking to that. The second is I wholeheartedly support your aspirations that this isn't just about roads and highways engineering, it's about placemaking. That's great. Do you believe that you have the budget to do that job properly? Because I would imagine rolling that approach out across the entire city would be monstrously expensive. The third question is about enforcement, and on the roads where you are reducing speed limits, that's been a mixed bag so far in terms of the police's willingness to enforce. Do you anticipate that changing, or would you be looking to make changes to the fabric of the road, which would make them more or less self-enforcing in terms of speed limit? And the fourth one is this modelling issue, because while I welcome the thinking, it does seem slightly cart before horse, in as much as if we haven't done the modelling of what the displacement effects might be, we could be signing up to a process which has unforeseen consequences. And again, I feel that particularly acutely, given the planned growth for the biomedical campus. We know that Cambridge South Station and the CSET busway have to succeed at a pretty unusual level in order to enable the campus's growth to go ahead without completely seizing the area up. Again, how do you see this plan playing out against the campus's growth ambitions?
Okay, right. In terms of resilience, I think, can we give a cast iron guarantee that we will never have a repetition of the sort of incident you were suggesting after the accident at Addenbrooke's roundabout? I think it's impossible to give a guarantee. We are working with the Streetworks team to ensure that we've undertaken a thorough review of how we can make the network as resilient as it possibly can. I think there is a key issue about the ability of the county council to respond to incidents on the main road network, because clearly, you can only stretch our network so far. And if you, as you pointed out, if you get key elements of it, particularly anywhere on the ring road, if there's an incident there, it can have quite a significant impact on a large area of the city. We're certainly working with our colleagues there to see how we could provide better resilience. But at the end of the day, it probably comes down to putting more resource into that. But it's clearly an issue that we need to reflect on as part of the development of this project. In terms of placemaking, yes, I think we're very, very keen to push on that. We're working closely with our colleagues through the planning service to pick up on their experience and to make sure that we can reflect that placemaking through setting out the sort of characteristics we would have for those categories of roads going forward. And certainly when you look at the early consultation that the City Council has done on the city centre, which I think clearly shows there is quite a significant appetite out there from the public to make sure we're delivering on that placemaking element of the project. In terms of funding, well, we don't have any funding set aside for a new review at the present time. That's going to be an issue for members to consider a little bit further down the line. I think it's worth stressing at this point that the initial stage of this project is very much about setting out aspiration for what the network needs to look like in the future. There will be a second element to this when we look at how we move the current network to the place we want it to be. And we will have further consultation on what the priorities might be, the timescales, and how we would align the delivery of a new network with everything else that's going on in the city, because there's an awful lot of activity on the network. So there will be once we've defined where we want the journey to end, we'll then carry out a consultation on how we undertake that journey in terms of priorities and funding, and making sure we're clear that we understand each stage of the project as we move forward. And that links in very much to that issue about modelling, that we, once we know where we want to go to, we can then start undertaking the modelling and understand each stage of the process to make sure we are clear on what needs to be done in terms of mitigating any negative aspects that come out of this. We have identified that whilst the reclassification of the network can be a standalone project, if it was aligned with other things that are going on, notably the Making Connections proposals that would see significant investment in better public transport, but also the potential for some form of charging, that would make the delivery of a new network that much easier. And of course, it would also potentially provide more revenue, some of which may, if members want, be targeted towards issues like greater placemaking within the network. In terms of enforcement, I think that's a particularly important issue, because it's all very well talking about shaping the network and putting in restrictions on the network, but if you can't deliver on those restrictions, what's the point in doing this? So we've mentioned that in earlier reports to the GCP's executive board, that we need to take enforcement very seriously. Certain elements of enforcement can lie with the county council, but there are elements that rely on others, such as the police, around speeding enforcement. So, we will be working very closely with the police as we move forward to see how they respond to some of the challenges that might come out of this. But I think when you're focusing on the issue of speed on the network, I think there is there's a real appetite out there to see a lot of speed limits reduced in the city, and to see the resources being put into delivering those lower speeds, not just changing speed limit signs. Hopefully I've responded to all your points.
Okay, thank you. I think that's Councillor Page-Croft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for your presentation. My problem is just with the buses. We don't have enough buses. We don't have enough bus routes, especially if you live outside of Cambridge, trying to come into Cambridge. I think Councillor Swatter touched on this, because Addenbrooke's is a big place. It's a lot of people working there, a lot of people working shifts. How are we going to get them safely with bus routes in there if we don't have the bus routes on, especially coming in? I think where my sister lives, they have one bus a week, which is rubbish. So we need to get the bus services sorted out. Also, could you just elaborate a little bit on what you meant about the taxis, the difference between the Hackney and the private hire? How is that going to work? Because I know when you closed off Mill Road Bridge that I had a lot of complaints from taxi drivers saying they had to go round a lot because they couldn't go over Mill Road Bridge, and a lot of them were knocking money off of people's bills because they felt really guilty about having to go round a bit further, and they didn't want to pass that money on to their customers. So I think personally, I would like to see the taxi drivers able to go where the bus drivers goes, because they have to make a living as well. Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of the overall level of bus provision across the Greater Cambridge area, I think members of the Executive Board, I think absolutely recognise that, and that's why they're putting so much effort into developing a new network, working closely with the Combined Authority and the County Council. And I think their aspiration is to deliver a real step change in the level of public transport provision in the area. And we've had a couple of consultations on that, and the board will consider this again later this year when they will be firming up on the way forward in terms of how they want to provide that enhanced public transport provision. But clearly the key issue is you've got to have the money to provide that. And there's a lot of focus on providing more buses, higher frequency services, facilitating access from a greater number of villages and settlements outside of the city. But clearly that comes at a cost, and certainly they're very keen to explore how they might provide the funding to allow that significant step change to be delivered. So I think, I think most of the board members, or all of the board members, would echo your concerns that unless we can deliver on those better bus services, it makes it harder to do all these other things to enhance the road network. In terms of taxes, you raised some relevant points there. We are asking some very open questions about taxes, and opinions vary. Some people understand that taxes do form, for some people do provide a level of public transport. For some people, it's their only level of transport. But equally, at the other end of the argument, people could argue, well, it's just another car trip on the network, and we need to address this issue about suppressing the number of car trips on the network. So again, we're very open to comments on that, and focusing on whether we're right to raise this question about a different approach between Hackney carriages that have to rank, to operate in the city. They have to get to our ranks, as opposed to those private hire vehicles that you just phone up and pre-book, and they can come from afar to pick you up if you require, and whether that consistent approach is still appropriate. So we're very open to views on that particular issue.
Chair, can I just come back on that?
Please.
Yeah, I have sat on the licensing committee for quite a few years, and it is actually coming up for a rule that when cars have to be renewed, which is every 8 years, they have to be electric. So it won't be them causing pollution on our roads, because eventually all of our fleet is going to be electric.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we do need to take a look more broadly. The city is obviously set on that course, and we'll see all taxis being much cleaner in the future. But clearly, there's the ability for hire cars from across the nation to come into the city and operate. So we also need to look, what's being done in those areas as well.
Maybe just a quick comment on that. I mean, even if maybe for us there's a difference between Hackney carriages and private hire vehicles, I think for many customers there is not. So they might not see that difference. And if then there are different rules for these two categories, then I can see some customers getting very angry if they suddenly realize or thinking that the driver takes them for a ride, when they go around and take the longer route. So anyway, yeah, that's just a comment. But there's Councillor Lee still waiting.
Hi. So I have two questions really. First one is with the proposed road changes. I am vaguely aware that in certain places, especially in the Netherlands, they kind of essentially decided that they would make traveling by car as inconvenient as possible, and would redirect cars via a different route in order to free up space for pedestrians and bike users. Is that part of the thinking, and in which case, if it is, how are we planning to integrate that into existing cycle infrastructure and also improve cycling infrastructure so that these routes can provide the most benefit for what we are aiming to do? And the second one, and apologies if you have mentioned it, because I know that Councillor Sam Davies did ask a question about enforcement, but it seemed your answers seemed to focus predominantly on speed, whereas I'm thinking more in terms of how will we make sure that cars aren't just using the roads as they are anyway, as opposed to, if a road is accessible by a resident, how do we ensure that someone from a road over that is part of a different road can't access that?
Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps if I take those in reverse order. In terms of enforcement, yeah, we do have some difficulties at the present time. You can put up access restrictions with the right signing and the like, but you can't always guarantee that the public will take notice of that. The government are in the process of providing new regulations that would allow local authorities outside of London to use greater camera enforcement powers for access restrictions. And those powers would, I think, allow us to undertake a step change in terms of enforcing a lot of restrictions on the network. Hopefully government will stick with their timetable and get those powers through to local authorities sometime this year, and I think that will provide an extremely useful enforcement tool for us going forward. Currently, we can only use cameras on bus lanes and bus gates, but where you've got more complicated access restrictions, like in the city centre, you currently can't use camera enforcement on that. So that will be a big step forward in terms of making sure we do enforce these restrictions if we bring them in. In terms of your reference to the Netherlands and their approach to promoting cycle routes and trying to deter car-based travel, clearly the measures that we're proposing would create, we believe, a great number of routes which will be far more friendly to walking and cycling than they are at the present time. But also, I suppose you could equally argue, well, if you're taking some of that traffic onto main roads, would the situation get worse for cyclists there? I think one of the problems is with the review, it's likely that people will focus all the attention on the local roads and streets where we could filter out traffic. But I think as part of the review, we need to also make sure that we are looking at our main roads and we are continuing to invest in those roads to make sure that we're continuing to provide greater segregation between active travel modes and motorised traffic. So I think improvements on the main road network are an equally important part of this agenda. And we need to make sure that, we are delivering on that aspect as well as improving some of the local roads and streets. And we have been looking at examples across Europe. People often mention places like Ghent, where they've adopted a similar sort of approach to filtering their network. So we have been looking looking at experiences elsewhere in terms of developing our own network.
Okay.
Sorry, what's going on?
If I could just make a follow-up point with regards to the cycling infrastructure, I was also thinking mostly about how the roads will essentially displace traffic rather than necessarily reduce traffic. And if we do intend it to reduce traffic, then we need to provide viable alternatives. And whether that's public transport, which frankly the area has a sketchy history with, and if we plan to improve cycling, well, I think a lot of residents in Cambridge do already cycle because it is so inconvenient to drive. So really we will be just essentially, getting people have to commute into Cambridge and pushing the problem onto them. So if there is greater integration of cycling infrastructure, for example, more bike parking, secure bike parking, especially at the park and rides, that would help create, a way to remove traffic from or demand for traffic in Cambridge and allow more people to cycle into Cambridge. That was kind of the point I was making, really.
Can I make a few observations, Councillor Ashton?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think most of us are quite aware the gridlock is when the schools are about. When the schools aren't around, you drive around Cambridge and you don't have a problem. When it's school time, boy, do we all feel the difference. So I think we need to look at maybe how can we try and offset some of the school traffic, which is a massive problem. And also, we need proper facts and figures. It's great to talk about climate change and the fact the air quality is disastrous, but nobody ever comes along and says to us, when this road is operated now, this is the air quality, and now we've taken this traffic off, this is the air quality now. Because the facts and figures are showing that whenever we close a road, that traffic is displaced onto another road, the traffic does not go down. And I've been in Cambridge 50 years, and as Councillor Davis pointed out earlier, when we have a problem now, like we did on Trumpington Fen Road the other week, the traffic cannot get away. Whereas before we could find those little streets where you could alleviate the problems. And so we need the proper facts and figures so people can make proper decisions. So we turn around and say, so many thousand cars use this road in a week. If we close it down, that traffic is either going to disappear, it's not going to, it's going to go on these other roads. And how will these other roads cope with it? And what will be the air pollution? Because all we're going to do is move the air pollution from one street to somebody else's street. So we need to get facts and figures. So when we talk to our residents, they have a proper understanding of what we are going to achieve, instead of just closing these roads off bit by bit. And when we talk about residents having a say in it, I'll give you a good example of Church End, where the residents want the road closed off, but the county will not close the road off because it acts as a feeder for Coldham's Lane. And we tried for 20 years. So there are certain roads in Cambridge now where residents are fully keen on closing them, but they're not allowed to close them. And other roads that we want kept open, they're being shut. So we need to get proper facts and figures. So when we go to our residents, we can say, this is going to be the difference. This is what will happen with the traffic. Because at the moment, we close one road off, and then, like I say, the traffic just has to go on another road. And that's not solving anybody's problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashton. Is there a reply to that?
Chair, I would, clearly the issue of traffic displacement is one of the key issues that we need to take into account here. But I think it's worth reflecting on experience across this country where similar work has been done to remove traffic from residential areas. And when you look at a recent study that was looking at a collection of schemes across the country, it did recognise that there was some degree of transfer, but it also found that the level of that transfer was not as great as people thought it would be. Clearly, these sorts of intervention on the network will encourage some people to change their mode of travel. It will encourage some people possibly not to make their journeys at certain times of the day, but clearly some of them will transfer. But experience suggests it's not as great as people might fear it will be. Having said that, I think the points about making sure we have data available and we've done proper assessments and that we do proper monitoring to show what the outcomes are all important aspects of delivering this project. But clearly, as I said, at this stage, we're focusing on very much on what our aspirations are for what the network needs to become. We'll go through all this detail before we get into that implementation stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions for Richard here? If that's okay, Councillor Davies.
Sorry, I stuck it in the chat, but I may as well say it to Richard. I fully agree with Councillor Ashton that the modelling needs to be extensive and transparent, because the balance between traffic evaporation and traffic displacement is obviously going to be different in Cambridge because of the extreme growth that's happening at the same time. And I would be surprised. I would like to know other settings where this kind of rebalancing has happened in parallel with the intense growth that the city and its surroundings are currently experiencing.
Okay. Is there, yeah. Would you like to have the final word, Richard?
I think Councillor Davies makes a very good point that, we have looked elsewhere, but, I think the fact that Cambridge is under so much pressure through growth is a very relevant factor that we need to take into account.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, one last time. So is there, okay, there's another, okay. Oh, there was a question from in the mailbox, yeah.
If you're happy for me to read it out, Chair.
I am, yes, of course.
It's from Mark Lawrence Jones. Where would the closures filters for private cars be on Hills Road, Queenie Disway and Cherry Hinton Road? We need to understand the intentions, which might be good for residents, before we can make intelligent comments. Is most congestion caused by people out of town coming in rather than residents? Could ANPR technology not be used to allow residents to access more than one mode on the network, rather than creating a lot of additional mileage for residents who find themselves just on the wrong side of the filter for them?
Right. Well, in terms of, we carried out a very large ANPR survey across the whole of the Greater Cambridge area back in 2017. And that showed that when you look at the trips on the network in Cambridge, half of them start outside of the city and half of them start inside the city. So, whilst drivers coming from outside of the city are contributing towards congestion on the city road network, so are many local residents who often are travelling fairly short distances and who have probably better access to public transport than many people outside of the city. So I don't think it's a question of one or the other. I think they are both contributing to the problem, so they both need to contribute to the solution to that. If we have those ANPR powers, yes, we can be flexible, and members will need to reflect on what policies we adopt when we start using that sort of regulation if it comes available from government. In terms of the details around where would some of these modal filters go, we're deliberately at this stage not getting into that detail. We're very much testing principles here. If the principles are accepted, we would then go into a second stage where we would look at the detail then, and there would be further consultation with local communities about where would be the best location for some of those filters to go. I'm sure there'll be plenty of suggestions, plenty of possible locations, but that will be explored through further consultation.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah, the model filters will be like not in my backyard. So as long as I can get around, I'm fine, but I'll block somebody else off from doing this. I mean, we need to state now where we could have these modal filters, because we'll be talking about putting one on Calder's Lane for the bridge. But the reality would be anybody wanting to get to the beehive then would not be able to access it if you came out of Cherry Hinton, unless you went up Balmoral Road, already congested, onto Newmarket Road, already congested, down Calder's Lane, already congested, to get to the beehive to do your shopping. So we need to be thinking now, rather than say, we'll think about the filters afterwards. We need to be looking now to say, if this system is going to work, where would the filters have to go, so people understand now this is the reality of what we're talking about. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Floberg.
Thank you, Mr. Preston. Yes, I just would like to second what Councillor Ashton has said. We basically today we are the voice of the residents, and we want solutions to the issues we have shared with you today, which is mainly transport. We want transport solutions because we have a problem of accessibility, but also, I mean, there is no need to wait for consultation for this. I mean, yes, of course, but it's a reality, and it's something that you should be thinking from now, maybe in the next meeting you should be able to share your strategies in terms of solutions to these issues. And then I don't know if you are able to answer this question, and it's about the proportion of your funding that you have for cycling and pedestrian strategies, because at the moment it's not working. What we need to be thinking about more resources to change the current problems we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flaubert. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think it's difficult. Certainly, when the executive board looked at this matter, there was a key. I suppose they had to decide how much detail they wanted to go out to the public on at this stage. And I think there was a fear that if you start getting into the detail at this early stage, you don't really get the focus on the principles that we're putting forward here to the way that we operate the network. As I say, I can only emphasise that if these principles are accepted, then we would move on to that debate about the detail where we would provide some of these closures, and we would, welcome discussion with local communities on that, because there, as I say, there will be lots of ideas, I think, and we need to look at all the pros and cons. So, I think this is the start of a long conversation. I know some people will be frustrated. They want to see lots of action quite quickly, but the board believes that we should take this one step at a time to make sure people understand the principles before we get into the detail.
Okay, maybe a last question from Councillor Cox.
Hello, yes, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Chair. My question is this something which is a replacement to the congestion charge, or is that something which is still a possibility in the future?
Both the classification review and the Making Connections proposals, which envisage some form of charge, they're all part of the city access agenda here. They can work in tandem, they can work separately. I think over the next few months, as the executive board looks at the Making Connections proposals, we'll get a clear idea of where they want to go with those measures. And I think one of the things we will have to demonstrate as we go forward, if they wish to go down the route of congestion charging, we'll need to demonstrate how that will dovetail and align with the work we're doing on the reclassification of the road network. Because I think if we get that right, and you can maximise your outcomes here, if we can align all of our projects in the most effective way.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, I would like to thank all the attendees for the nice, interesting discussion, and of course, especially Richard for the informative presentation and his detailed responses to the questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
And that means we can then move on to, I think it's the final item on the agenda, on the environmental report, page 23. And I would like to welcome Wendy Johnston, Engagement and Enforcement Manager. Can you please present your report, Wendy?
Thank you, Chair. So just to draw your attention to a few key points, and then I'm happy to take any questions on the report or anything I can take back to colleagues or answer for members. So on page 27 of the agenda pack, we were really pleased to be able to have a corporate event with Benevolent in April 2021, who did some really good work with us at Cherry Hinton Recreation Ground, and we've actually got a few more corporate groups coming in the upcoming months across different areas of the south, which is very positive to see, because they undertake a lot of different work for us. Also, just to draw your attention to the operations team for the south area, the previous staff member Grant Bishop has now left, and we have a new team leader called James Maberley, who has been with us since April. He is very new in the role, and I'm sure we'll be able to help around any operational issues that there may be. He is going to be making himself known to all members at some point over the coming months. We were also really lucky to be able to do the Great British Spring Clean again this year and had a number of really successful litter picks. We had a couple of them in Trumpington this year, which were really well attended at Byron's Pool and at Hobson's Park. And that's just some of the real key points for the area. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for this very comprehensive report. It was made interesting reading. I also like always the nice pictures in there. Are there any questions?
Yes. Oh, sorry, Mark, you go first this time.
Yes, please. Who wanted to go first? I didn't quite hear.
I was kind of frustrated, but I'll go second because I think I'd like to on the audio. I'll count for my hand if I'll do any kind of indication.
I'm afraid I did not understand this. I mean, the connection is very bad. Can I? Okay.
It's Councillor Ashton. I can't indicate because I'm just on the audio. So I spoke out. I think somebody spoke before me.
Okay, I'm afraid I did not see in what sequence the hands go up. So on my screen, it's Councillor Slater at the top.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashton. We do know you want to speak now. Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. It's really interesting reading and good thing to have on the record. I hadn't appreciated there's this good combination between having had a roundtable councillors with the police commissioner just before this, when they were talking about community payback, and then to have it in your report as well. It's clearly a very useful component of getting the work done. And I'm certainly hoping to make most of that, as Councillor Davis knows from what I was talking about earlier. Is it possible at this stage to chip in, maybe taking words out of Councillor Cox's mouth, but we do have fly tipping under the guise of a recycling centre in Trumpington, just by the pavilion. And certainly the local councillors are well aware of this. This was a pioneering installation in the days when we didn't have curbside recycling. We feel it's now should be removed. And we were wondering, as we've got this report in front of us, can we just put that to you, please, Wendy, to find out how that could be done? Because it is just, as I say, attracting fly tipping. Send you photos if you need them. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ashton, maybe now's your chance.
Yes, thank you. Wendy, thanks for all the help and support you put into Cherry Hinton. Just a quick point. When you enter the wreck off the high street, we have a tiny small bin there which gets incredibly full. And yet next to the bus stop, we've got two massive recycling bins. Is it possible we could swap them around? Because I think we'd do far better with those two recycling bins at the entrance to the wreck. Thank you.
Okay, is that okay? I guess you just nodded, Wendy. So I guess it's noted and taken care of. Excellent. In that case, Councillor Lee, please.
Yes. So it seemed on the image that there was a disproportionate amount of fly tipping on Hewlett Road. Is that all one house, or is on one instant, or is that several along the road?
I do believe that is one incident of fly tipping, from what I understand.
Okay, so it's one incident that was reported several times, or by several different members of the public, or something.
I think obviously the report refers to it doesn't actually ascertain where the fly tipping is, but I believe the photos are of two separate incidents of waste. I think it refers to dog control issues at Hewlett Road. Is that the one you're referring to, or the fly tipping? The photographs have kind of carried over the page, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. And I had a second question about the Queen's one, because it says there are 2 abandoned vehicle reports, but it goes on to list 3 different roads. So,
apologies, it's not Hills Road. It's Tilliard Way and Wolston Way.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Wendy. I'd like to mention something that I actually swapped emails about with a member of your team a while ago, which is the fact that clothing recycling bins seem to magically appear on our streets without any particular process, as far as I understand it. And I had pointed out that we now have 5 of them in a cluster next to the Queen Edith's pub, and A, that seems excessive, B, it encourages fly tipping there, and C, it stops us doing something nicer with some of that space. I gather one's also been deposited next to the bus stop outside the Co-op on the Pern Road roundabout. And I was just wondering, can you explain to us, so we all are aware, is there a process for licensing the installation of these things, or is it literally as it was described to me, which is someone rocks up with a crane on the back of a truck and offloads them, and then it's left to chance as to whether there's actually resource to get them moved on or not?
If I can come back on that, Chair.
Yes, please.
Okay, so as far as I'm aware, any ones that are placed on council land are done in agreement with the shared waste services. If they're on the highway, I'm not quite sure whether shared waste have to be aware of that or not. What I need to do is go back to Rebecca Weymouth Wood, who is the relevant manager from that service, to ask her the question. So if I could come back with that as an action point, Councillor Davies, that would be the best point. I'm not going to try and comment on something I can't give 100% response to today.
Okay, thank you. I mean, if I could quickly ask 2 questions, which, and I apologize if this is actually not in your responsibility, but 2 issues that have come up several times now over the recent past. It's encroaching vegetation on foot and cycle paths, which sometimes even overgrows footpaths to a degree that pedestrians have to go onto a cycle path next to it, and with obvious, causing dangerous situation with especially Trumpington Road, where bicycles go at high speed in both directions. I mean, is there something within your or our powers to do something about it? It's quite predictable. Every year at the same time this happens, and all it takes is basically somebody to just cut these hedges back a bit. And the other issue is that apparently on some play areas, the grass grows quite long. So which is then, I mean, and not just in parks, but actually play areas, playing fields, which might discourage people or children from playing ball even, let's say. So I've had some reports, I mean, George V playing field apparently, and maybe Councillor Cox can comment on that. I haven't seen that myself. Anstey Hall playing field. So I was just wondering what the procedure is there to keep the grass short, because I've been assured that on these in playing fields, grass is supposed to be kept short. So it's not about biodiversity. So I was just wondering what counts as short and what are we doing to keep it, sufficiently short. Thank you.
I'll just come back on those 2 points,
yes.
Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So in terms of vegetation that is obviously growing onto cycle paths, I assume we're talking about hedgerows, sort of where they overhang or shrubs. That is actually the responsibility of the county council highways. If there are anything, is there anything that is overgrowing from sort of private gardens, which I often do appreciate it can do. There is a simple web form that you can report that through to the highways officer. They do attend usually fairly promptly, and we do work alongside them where sometimes we're cutting these doing, we will obviously work with them to get that undertaken. If it's, for example, council land, your contact for James Maberley, your the team leader for the South, is in this report, and I would suggest anything like that could be, you could ask the questions to him, and he obviously as he's the area officer for the South area, will be able to answer specific site questions. In terms of the grass cutting, I'm not quite sure on the response to that. I will need to check with my colleagues in the development team and the operations team and come back to you if that's okay as another action point to explore what the frequency of cutting is and what the arrangements are.
Okay, I mean, that would be great, actually. I mean, with respect to the first point, I mean, I understand that it's the county council who basically contracts it out to the city council. So it is ultimately the city council that does the cutting. That's what I understood. But also my point is also it's predictable, so we shouldn't wait for residents to complain. I mean, they might only complain when it's too late. So it's predictable. It happens same time every year, and we want to encourage people to walk and cycle. So if there is something, you know, that could be done better, then I think we should look into that. And it is an issue on some stretches of Trumping Road. I cycle up and down there quite regularly. And I usually cycle, but sometimes you do see pedestrians, elderly children, and they don't necessarily, on the cycleway, on the cycle path, and they don't necessarily think about it. And then there are these bicycles at high speed, especially during rush hour, people rushing home or rushing to work. And I think it is dangerous. So, yeah, but thank you very much. I would appreciate if you could find more information on that somehow. There are still two hands up. I think it's Councillor Davies this time. Yeah.
I do apologise, Chair. That's not supposed to be there.
Okay. And okay, Councillor Slatter then.
Well, I think I'd like to chip in on the overhanging vegetation. As you know, we've had this to and fro for a long time. Now, yes, we know it's a county responsibility. And yes, we know that Andy Barham has asked Grant, and he'll no doubt have asked his successor to do that. But I think what we need to do is to establish a principle of prevention rather than cure. And if it means we cut things back rather viciously during the winter, and we do maybe have some of the residents getting a bit upset, we know perfectly well how far that hedge grows by August. And it is foolishness to be having this argument again and again and again. Please do sort it out between the officers. As far as I know, Andy Barham has said that that's what the City Council is going to do, but it hasn't happened. So can we have a precautionary cutback? A vicious cutback maybe. It won't be at bird nesting time, but we know that the hedges will grow back, the nettles will reappear, but please let's do it properly. Maybe this is something for the community payback. We know that there are issues of working alongside the public, but I'm quite sure they'll be quite prepared to cycle very slowly that day with due care and attention in order to have safe cycling the rest of the year. So please, let's not let it go any longer. Let's have another South Area Committee discussion on this one. Thank you.
Okay, I guess Councillor Slatter made the point very well. So yeah, let's hope that we can take appropriate action then in the near future. I certainly don't want to run into any pedestrians on any of these roads. But are there any more questions then or comments? I think we are now reaching the end of this meeting. But if there are no questions on this particular issue, then thank you very much, Wendy, for this very comprehensive report and for answering our questions. And that brings us, I'm assuming there's nothing in the mailbox, Committee Manager, please. Okay, I take that as a no.
Chair, I actually have a question. You missed me.
Okay, sorry, no, I didn't see your hand there. Sorry, Councillor Floberg.
Yes, it's a question for Wendy, please. I hope she's
still around.
Yes, well, I have, sorry, my camera, I don't know, doesn't want to go on.
I'm afraid I think Wendy has left us.
Gone. Oh God, okay.
Yeah, I think your hand went up a bit too late. You can, I don't know if
that's still fine.
If you think it makes sense, you can ask the question now. Otherwise, I'm sure you could email it to her.
Yes.
And Councillor Slatter, your hand is still up as well? No, Councillor Slatter, no new question? Okay, thank you very much. So now, yeah, thank you very much, everyone who participated in this committee meeting this evening. I think it's been a very interesting and informative discussion, and also we had some nice presentations here. Let me just remind you that the next committee meeting is scheduled for the 5th of September 2022, so please put that in your diaries. And finally, I would like to ask the meeting producer to terminate the live stream. Thank you very much, everyone.